Welcome to Fun, Mentals, where you want to go and what you want to know to develop a playful mindset. I am your host, Baron von Merkva. You know, being the writer/editor to our own stories is still a really good analogy for life. It's at once a freeing creative possibility and a self-imposed pressure to perform. Being responsible for how our lives are progressing is very much like that. And in general, we've allowed ourselves to at least cop to some of our good outcomes. The bad ones, not so much. Everyone watching is clear that feeling guilt over our mistakes is the polar opposite of responsibility, right? So here we are with that familiar mix of excitement and trepidation, still wondering how we can generate more of the former and less of the latter. How do we find the sweet spot in life and sustain it? No one expects or even wants sunshine and rainbows all the time. How boring. But why does it seem so unnatural to have a persistent balance of joy throughout all the distress? Or to phrase that question another way, why is it so hard to stick with generating joy and fulfillment in our lives? We know everything we need to know to have more joy and fulfillment, yet we keep pretending we don't. What the heck is the matter with us? Nothing. That's the ultimate conclusion we can arrive at if we're truly interested in generating that fun, fulfilled life. There's nothing wrong here. There may still be unpleasant and undesirable circumstances to deal with, yet the idea that those circumstances should not be there in a fun, fulfilled life is denying a simple fact. We wrote them in there. Not that we intentionally caused them, but that we allowed them to make ourselves or someone else wrong. When it's ourselves, it's guilt and shame and regret. When it's others, it's judgment and retribution. We still write the story going forward. And of course, we want to pay close attention to our unfolding story in the present. But we can also edit what's already been written. Now, I'm not saying edit out or whitewash those traumatic events in our lives. To whatever degree they have shaped us, they are important chapters in our stories. They cannot simply be dismissed. Yet we can write a new meaning for these important chapters, if we choose to. Again, not to rewrite your own history, but to restate what kind of impact they have on us now. Sounds like a school assignment, right? Go back and edit the story you already wrote. Who wants to do that? Leave the past in the past. Haven't we revisited those old chapters enough already? Hasn't that gotten us in enough trouble? Yes, it has. And that's exactly why you may want to consider editing those chapters. Not in content, but in context. I think we often look at our big failures or tragedies as if they're cautionary tales. With enough experience and hindsight, we look at the difficult chapters of our lives as examples of what not to do in the future. We have this kind of silent vow to never write that story ever again, when perhaps the most useful action would be to simply do an edit. Not change the story, but perhaps change the conclusions. Let me give you a personal example. I had an incident when I was about 5 or 6 years old, where I announced that I was going to turn into Underdog. Underdog, that cartoon character that ran on TV in the early 60s. I absolutely loved Underdog. So much that I decided I was just going to become Underdog. Literally. Turning into a dog didn't bother me so much because I was going to be able to fly. Yeah, active imagination. Anyway, I was telling my brothers and sisters that this was going to happen by like the end of that week or something. I actually had the date picked. My younger sister and brother probably didn't know what to think about my prophecy. But my older sister and brother thought I was nuts. They couldn't believe that I actually thought I was going to turn into underdog. So much ridicule was heaped. Well, I would show them. Undeterred by their lack of faith, I kept believing anyway and psyched myself up as the pivotal day approached. Spoiler alert, when I woke up that morning of the transformation, I had not turned into underdog. So I endured the backlash from my older siblings and wondered what went wrong. Now, as a kid, I was crushed for a few days. Then I bounced on to the next crazy thing, no harm, no foul. And I turned out the way I turned out, more or less an adjusted adult years later. So, no big deal, right? Stupid kid believes stupid thing and then gets proven wrong. Happens to all of us. It's still happening for most of us. But what I made that mean haunted me for decades. Not in any life-altering way, but just in how I remembered the incident. I thought that it was a brutal coming to grips with the real world, or the death of my innocence, or a particularly harsh lesson in what was possible in life, a major break in my reality at the time. And remembering it like that, it had always made me a little sad. Poor little Baron has his dreams dashed, yeah? Even though I laughed about it, I could still feel that twinge of disappointment, a kind of wistful melancholy over my deflated belief that anything is possible. But when I really re-examined my default feelings about this incident, I found a different meaning. Instead of the poor little kid being slapped down by the grim reality of life, I saw something else. I saw an unabashed dreamer, willing to risk the humiliation of my peers for my dream. I saw an audacious goal setter, leaping before I looked, with no concern for the consequences of being wrong. Yes, it was diluted, but I think it was also a little courageous. So I didn't change the story. I edited it. What was, for most of my life, one of those cautionary tales about the limits of dreams has become a heartwarming example of the power of possibility and imagination. I no longer pity that poor little kid who had his comeuppance with the real world. I kind of like this kid. Didn't change the story, changed the meaning of the story. I did a bit of editing to turn a sad tragedy into a bit of a hopeful triumph. Now you might be thinking, big deal. You're just reinterpreting some silly little episode I had as a kid. So what? Well, imagine if you could edit the 100 other hurts and heartbreaks we all suffer as we grow. Imagine what direction our story could go if we just owned the narrative. Look, I'm a firm advocate of leaving the past in the past. Yet if we're living life like we can't repeat what we consider our biggest screw-ups, that's as big a trap as living in the past. I don't know how the rest of my life is going to turn out, but I've got some pretty cool ideas. And hey, if I manage to stick around for another 40 years, who knows? With advancement in genetics, maybe I could be spliced together as a half man, half dog. Likewise, with the technology, maybe there'll be anti-gravity belts, so I could essentially fly too. Am I just setting myself up to fail with my big goals, like that deluded little kid did so many years ago? Depends on how I tell the story. Now, go out and play.